أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to Ramadan Reflections for today, the 17th day of the blessed month of Ramadan in 2023. Now today we would like to continue where we left off yesterday and delve a bit deeper into the wisdom and the philosophy of the hijab. Obviously we can't do a thorough investigation, but we just try to leave bits and pieces that we can hopefully spend our own time on research, looking at the verses of the Quran and their commentaries, studying the books of our great scholars, to try and better understand the centrality of hijab within our lives. For women, obviously, primarily first and foremost, because this theme, this Ramadan, is not like the other women in the Quran, but also recognizing the reality that hijab is also a component for the life of a male Muslim. And as we had mentioned yesterday, and we will try to elaborate on that a bit more today, is that hijab is not just a piece of cloth on the head. It's not just the style of covering of the body, although primarily that is one of the key integral parts of hijab. But as we will continue on, and we have again already mentioned it, that hijab is also a lifestyle. It has more to do, or it has a lot to do rather, with how we live our lives, both not only our real lives with real human beings that we interact with at work, at school, in the malls, but also our virtual lives, how we interact with people online and what we do online, who we speak to, how we speak to them, how much information we share with them. These are all aspects of hijab, and we could really call these, the 21st century hijab, because it's not just about physical interaction, but now it's also about our virtual interactions with people online. Without a doubt, the era which we are currently living in, this era of liberation, of sexual freedoms, is one in which people have really thrown off the shackles of any limitations. And I literally mean any limitations. In Canada at least, women have fought for and won the right to walk around topless. This is enshrined in the Canadian Charter of Rights, and it's been put into practice in many provinces across Canada. These and other so-called freedoms, including the proliferation of social media and the so-called influencers on Instagram and TikTok and what have you, they've made it really ultra difficult, extremely difficult to even try and discuss the topic of modesty, chastity, and hijab, especially within the rubrics of Islam and the religion of the teachings of the Quran. In some quarters, if you try and discuss hijab, you'll be told that, this is an antiquated rule for other times and cultures. It doesn't fit with a Canadian or a Western lifestyle. We already dress modestly enough, so there's no need for specific rules of what to cover. Some Muslim women are even heard saying that they're dressing modestly according to the norms of Western life. They're wearing a blouse or a shirt, long sleeves, pant, loose fitting. So there's no need for specific coverings like a scarf on the head, what we term hijab. Other opinions are that men are not entitled to speak about hijab, as they are, simply put, men. And women must lead and determine the discourse of hijab, because men we just don't get it. Now, there's really no need to entertain such opinions. Really, I don't feel a need to have to respond to any of these. So I want to move on and continue where we left off yesterday. Let me begin, first of all, looking at this headscarf tradition. We know that Islam is not the only religion that had mandated hijab and modesty for its followers. Actually, all of the monotheistic religions, as well as many other traditions that don't or are not seeming to have been derived from a monotheistic origin, they've also asked their believers to follow similar rules, men and women. The head covering has always held significance in religious communities. You could look at the Judeo-Christians, you can look at even at people like the Sikh community, where men cover their head, women cover their head. and many other cultures around the world, including some of the indigenous communities. Now, until the latter half of the 20th century, headscarves were, as I said, common. They were commonly worn by women in different parts of the world, religiously or cultural-wise. In recent decades, obviously, wearing the headscarf has declined as people shift away from religion and identify less with traditional, religious tradition and faith, and live a more secular, free lifestyle. Now, looking at the etiquette of hijab and what is modest conduct, hijab and really the Islamic guidelines regarding modest conduct are not limited simply to dressing in a certain way. It's not just about the clothing, it's about the person inside the clothing and their attitude. So when interacting with the opposite gender who are not mahram, that is people who are not related by blood or marriage, inner modesty must also be reflected in purity of intention, appropriate body movement, physical positioning, controlling the gaze of the opposite gender, a respectful voice and tone when speaking, avoiding private encounters in potentially provocative situations, and obviously refraining from any type of physical contact with the opposite gender, even so much as a handshake or a high five or a fist bump. Now, the etiquette of hijab, brothers and sisters, and modest conduct must also be applied to social media and all of our online encounters. Many times people tend to let down their guard when chatting online, and what starts out as innocent, chit-chat can easily lead to very inappropriate interactions. So we need to be aware of our online presence as well for hijab to be maintained. Adhering to these etiquettes of hijab is not meant to restrict participation of women in society. It's actually to maintain virtue and purity in the society and allow human beings, men and women, to function and progress without the debilitating effects of immodesty and sexual tension. And we can see this even in the world today, with the Me Too movement that started a few years back. Now, hijab, as I said, is not just a dress, a piece of clothing, a fashion statement. It's a lifestyle choice. And when you focus only on a physical hijab, you misunderstand the essence. And many people do this. Many people will say, for example, that show me a verse of the Quran where hijab is actually mentioned by name. The word hijab is used. And we have to say that, hijab is not mentioned in the Quran with the word hijab. The Quran uses the word hijab in many other ways. A partition between men and women, for example. Allah uses it to talk about barzakh, the realm between this world and the world to come when we're in the grave. Hijab is used in many ways in the Quran, but not for a piece of clothing. But the verses of the Quran, and there are multiple verses that speak about a covering in general, they give us one aspect, but also we have to recognize that hijab entails modesty in our gaze, in our way of speech, and our interaction. And this is definitely within the Quran, and this is definitely within the Sunnah of our beloved Prophet Muhammad, may God bless him and his family. Now, one of the problems that can lead to misunderstandings and a dislike of hijab in the Muslim society is when we only focus on the outer form and we ignore other aspects of this noble quality that God has put into place in this religion. Maintaining the hijab speaks of, it speaks of an inner modesty, and in turn, that inner modesty then translates into the outer manifestation, which will influence and strengthen the inner self even more. And so really it works both ways, as with all things in life. Let me give you a practical example. We referred to this a few days ago. The dhikr of Allah, the remembrance of God. It's a manifestation of our inner faith. But in turn, the dhikr can help calm and strengthen the believing heart. And so the outward dhikr strengthens the inner, and the inner continues to strengthen the outward, or displays on the outward. Now, women who wear hijab are not invisible or hiding. They're not ashamed of their body. They are visible in a very particular manner, and they're active participants in planning how they will be visible. They play different roles in society and contribute to it, as we see not only in today's day and age in many of the Muslim countries where Muslim women wear hijab, and they have, if you want to look at the educational aspect, they've excelled in university. They hold high positions in many fields of science and technology. You have many examples of entrepreneurs who are women in the Muslim world, in the Muslim countries. And even locally, you have women who are wearing hijab, who are working in Fortune 500 companies, who are working in hospitals, who are working in many different industries. So they are not hiding behind a hijab or a scarf. No, that scarf allows them to function and contribute to society, but in the way that they set the standards. Now, this spiritual ethos of the hijab that I wanted to further elaborate upon, the obligation of hijab, it has many reasons behind it. Most people, we focus on the physical and the social reasons, and those are true. We don't want to give anything away from those, but we also have to recognize, brothers and sisters, there are also profound spiritual and metaphysical meanings behind the hijab. Hijab is first and foremost an act of servitude to Allah. Not to your husband, not to your father, not to a male authority. It is servitude to God. It's an act of observance by one who understands their responsibility and accountability of fulfilling God's laws. Just as praying, fasting, Hajj, jihad, all of these are acts to fulfill our accountability to God. Rather than submitting to the self and the desires of the ego and our whims and desires, a believer, a Muslim, one who submits, they submit to the Creator, and that's all. And so the principle of hijab can't be taken lightly, can't be played around with. If one is really sincerely seeking Allah's pleasure, the Almighty Allah wants that pleasure, or not wants it, but that pleasure is found in Him by us obeying Him, following His commands, following what He wants us to do and not to do. And ultimately that is what is taqwa. Now we conclude this discussion here, and I realize that the topic needs to be discussed more openly in the right environment, with the right people and the time frame, not in a 6 to 10 minute video in the month of Ramadan. It calls for a panel discussion or a forum to better understand with scholars and others. So I'm going to end it there, but remind us that tomorrow onward, we're going to now turn our focus to practical examples from the Quran. Women that have been so unique and influential in the annals of history that Allah mentions them in the Quran and presents their stories for all of us, women and men, to learn from. There are numerous women which are documented in the Noble Quran, and we're going to review some of them, not all, unfortunately. But tomorrow we're going to begin our discussion with a woman who is very unique, Lady Hajra, peace be upon her, the wife of Prophet Ibrahim, peace be upon him. And her complete trust and reliance in Allah in the most difficult of times within her life. But yet a woman who we celebrate and we honor and we remember every time that we go to Mecca for the Hajj or the Umrah, or anytime we look at a picture of the Kaaba and the surroundings of the Haram, the sacred shrine, we are always drawn to her remembrance because of the powerful representation and the powerful legacy that she left behind in the city of Mecca. So continue with us tomorrow, brothers and sisters, as we review verses of the Quran about Hajra, peace be upon her, and glean some insight from practical examples of the noble Quran. Until tomorrow, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.